As the Iran war triggers an energy shock, some analysts are asking whether Donald Trump has effectively handed Vladimir Putin his biggest strategic win since the Ukraine invasion. A major U.S. strategic blunder has helped turn Russia almost overnight into one of the world's go-to energy suppliers again, as buyers scramble for alternative oil and gas. With Iranian attacks setting tankers ablaze and Qatar warning that its gas exports could face a total shutdown, Moscow is quietly emerging as a key beneficiary of the chaos. Qatar has cautioned that just one more heavy volley of strikes in and around the Strait of Hormuz could choke vital LNG lifelines for weeks or even months. As shipping through Hormuz grinds to a halt and insurers flee the risk, Russian oil suddenly looks like the world's safest and most accessible bet. With the strait effectively choked, U.S. allies starved of Gulf barrels, and Western sanctions quietly eased, Moscow is now able to market its crude as a relatively reliable alternative and sell those barrels at rising prices. After America's military operations in Venezuela and now Iran, Moscow is making its stance unmistakably clear, positioning itself as the steady counterweight in a world rocked by US-driven wars and energy turmoil. The Kremlin has declared that Russia remains a reliable supplier of oil, natural gas, and liquefied natural gas, stressing that buyers can count on Russian energy even as other routes falter and prices spike. Russian officials have said that Moscow can guarantee continued fuel deliveries despite the market chaos and supply disruptions linked to the Iran crisis, offering stability while others face shutdowns and shock. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov has emphasized that Russia is in ongoing dialogue with representatives of Iran's leadership, signaling that Moscow intends to stay closely engaged with Tehran even as the war escalates. Peskov has also pointed to a clear rise in demand for Russian energy because of the war in Iran, noting that more countries are now turning to Moscow as they scramble for secure oil and gas supplies. Reports note that Hungary and Slovakia are the last two European Union countries still buying Russian oil through the Druzhba pipeline, underscoring how some EU states remain dependent despite sanctions and diversification talk. Turkey, meanwhile, has emerged as the third largest importer of Russian fossil fuels globally as of mid-2025, highlighting how Ankara has deepened its energy ties with Moscow even as NATO tensions persist. Oil and gas sales account for roughly 30 to 50% of Russia's budget revenues and around 20% of its GDP, meaning every spike in prices linked to the Iran war directly strengthens the Kremlin's financial war chest. In line with this broader upheaval, Qatar's energy minister has issued a stark warning about the future of global energy shipments, directly tying his concerns to the escalating conflict in the Middle East. Saad al-Kaabi warned that the war across the region could force key Gulf exporters to halt oil and gas shipments altogether, effectively triggering an unprecedented shock to the world's energy lifelines. Speaking to the Financial Times on March 6, al-Kaabi cautioned that a prolonged conflict could bring down the economies of the world, as countries struggle to replace lost Gulf supplies and absorb soaring prices. He added that it would take Qatar weeks to months to return to normal delivery levels after Iran strikes, underlining how fragile and time-consuming any recovery of LNG flows would be once infrastructure is hit. Iran had already targeted Qatar's Ras Laffan liquefied natural gas complex, the world's largest LNG export plant, forcing a shutdown that sent global gas prices sharply higher and rattled energy markets worldwide. At the same time, Saudi Arabia announced a temporary shutdown of some units at its giant Ras Tanura oil refinery, another critical node in the global supply chain, as it assessed damage and security risks. Iranian drones also allegedly struck facilities linked to Saudi Aramco, compounding fears that coordinated attacks on multiple Gulf energy hubs could deepen the supply crunch and prolong the crisis. Ras Tanura, one of the world's largest oil export terminals and a vital artery for global crude flows, was hit and then partly shut, underscoring how even limited damage there can send shockwaves through energy markets. Saudi state energy giant Aramco temporarily halted operations at the Ras Tanura facility after the attack, Reuters and other outlets reported, as officials moved to secure the site and gauge the full extent of the impact. Iran has declared that it now has complete control over one of the world's most critical oil shipping routes, signaling that it can decide who moves through these waters as the war escalates. Tehran has warned that any vessel attempting to pass through the Strait of Hormuz could be set on fire, a threat aimed squarely at ships linked to the United States, Israel, and their European allies. In line with this warning, Iran has already targeted several tankers in Gulf waters, even as it suffers losses of its own warships in clashes at sea and comes under heavy aerial bombardment. The latest statement from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps was broadcast on Iranian state television, and it came even as Israeli strikes continued to pound Iranian territory and regional targets. On March 3, Donald Trump announced that U.S. warships would move in to protect commercial vessels traveling through the strait, vowing naval escorts to keep tankers moving despite Iran's threats. The Strait of Hormuz, lying just off the coast of Iran, is a vital maritime waterway in the Middle East and one of the most strategically important shipping corridors on the planet. The Strait of Hormuz is considered a critical global choke point, narrowing to roughly 33 kilometers at its tightest section, which makes traffic highly concentrated and vulnerable to disruption. Handling about 20 million barrels per day, this narrow passage carries close to 1/5 of the world's total oil consumption, making any instability there a potential trigger for worldwide energy shocks. The strait also carries roughly 20 to 25% of global liquefied natural gas volumes, most of it originating from Qatar, which uses this route as its primary export artery to markets across the globe. More than 80% of the crude oil that transits the Strait of Hormuz is destined for Asian markets, underlining how heavily Asia depends on uninterrupted flows through this narrow channel. China, India, Japan, and South Korea are among the primary importers of the oil and LNG shipped via the strait, so any prolonged disruption there would hit these economies particularly hard. The Strait of Hormuz is the only sea passage linking the oil-rich Persian Gulf to the open ocean, which means there are very few realistic alternatives if this route is blocked or severely threatened. Geographically, the strait connects the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and the wider Arabian Sea, acting as a narrow gateway between regional producers and global energy markets. Energy prices have surged after Tehran's missile and drone strikes on Gulf nation civilian and oil infrastructure, with markets reacting nervously to the heightened risk around this choke point. Oil prices have jumped by nearly 10%, while natural gas prices have spiked by more than 40%, according to reports, reflecting fears of deeper and longer-lasting disruptions. Repeated missile and drone attacks on oil and gas facilities around the region are constraining production and export capacity, steadily tightening global supply just as demand remains strong. On top of that, disruptions to oil tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz itself have amplified these price moves, as shipping delays and route closures feed directly into higher costs and market volatility.